I am absolutely thrilled to be welcoming Helen. Now, we probably all fell in love with Billy Plimpton. I know that I did. He was the main character in Helen's debut book, The Boy Who Made Everyone Laugh. Billy wants to be a stand-up comedian, but he has a stammer. He was also, in that book, a target for the school bully. But in the first story, we see Billy overcome his challenges as he learns that there's a difference between inviting the audience to laugh at him and encouraging the audience to laugh along with him. The book was shortlisted, I'm delighted to say, for the Costa Book Award in 2022. Well, now, and I am so thrilled, I've been waiting for this, Billy and his friends return in a new book, The Funniest Boy in the World. Fueled by the success of the talent show, Billy is convinced that he's on the threshold of comedic stardom, though Mum and Dad are firmly in the camp that school comes first. We pick up the story with Billy trying to get booked for some real gigs, but of course, it's not going to be that easy. Anyway, welcome, Helen.
Thanks for having me.
Really excited. This book has a lot of love, not only from children, but from teachers and librarians that we spend a lot of time working with. When you wrote the first book, did you know there was going to be a follow-up at that point?
No, as I was writing it that was in my head. But when they took it on, both my agent and my publisher actually said, no, it's a standalone. It's a standalone. And I was like, no, but I had all these ideas about what may happen. And even though they really were quite clear that this was going to be a standalone book, I obviously did put a couple of little things in there at the end, just in case. And so, yeah, when they came back to me and said, actually, we really want you to go back to Billy, I'd already got a couple of things that I knew were were ready and waiting. The fact that he just found out that his mum was pregnant, and the fact that he was going to go on an interview on telly, those things kind of were left open enough for me to go, okay, well, that's where we could maybe begin. If I was going back to it. So I had it in my mind, even if nobody else had.
Well, I know you've talked about this already, but there may be some people in the audience this evening who don't know how the story came, the first book, how that came about, the boy who made everyone laugh. See, I get the two titles mixed up. They've got funny and laugh, and I'm terrible with that kind of thing. Anyway, tell us about the first book and how it came about.
So it was a bit of a shock. It wasn't like I was looking for an idea for a book. I never thought I would write a book. It wasn't really part of my plan. And so, yeah, when the idea landed, I was quite surprised that my brain was telling me that I needed to write a book. But it happened because my son, Lenny, he was about 10 at the time, and he was really struggling with his stammer at the time. It was quite strong, and we'd been to the speech therapy, and there was quite a lot going on for him, and that's kind of why the idea hit at that time. And I'd really got into reading middle grade stuff with him for a couple of years before, and so I think reading books that really chimed, and it really got me back into reading actually again. And I think that's why when the idea, because before I'd been an actress, and so I'd written, but it had always been for the stage. And so I think because I'd been reading books with him, we'd never read about anybody with a stammer before. Stammers had only ever been portrayed in quite negative ways. And so when the idea landed, it was quite clear that it should be a book, and I needed to write it for him, really. And so I wrote the first chapter. When the idea happened, I was like, oh, and I just wrote a chapter straight away. I had no idea what I was doing. I literally had no plan or idea. And then I read that out to him when he got home from school, and we both got a little bit overexcited about the whole thing. And I wrote a chapter every day and read it to him. And that was kind of where it started. And I didn't, at that point, I had no idea that it was actually going to turn into a real book that people could read. So it was all a really amazing surprise.
And it's important actually for us to know that he was involved in that process, that this wasn't writing about him without his kind of his knowledge and also really his approval for what you were doing.
Yeah, it was really important. He was so pleased, and he was really. I think it made him feel. I think it made him feel really seen and understood, and it started conversations between us that we'd not had. It was a really brilliant thing. I mean, now he's 15. If I'd have tried to write about him in his current state, I think I'd get a very different response. But at the time, it was it was a really lovely thing.
Yeah. Don't worry, when he's 30, you'll be able to do it again. Just don't try in the intervening 15 years is all I can say. I wanted to talk about Billy a little bit and his relationship with his stammer, because actually that's become his identity, his USP as a comedian. But it seems that with success, sometimes his stammer disappears. It doesn't, for instance, surface during his television interview that he has after the talent show. So this is something of a dilemma for him because that's how he's created this persona.
Yeah, and I think that's been the really interesting thing of living with somebody who stammers, is that it's a really fickle and unpredictable beast. You can never kind of guess or predict when it might come up. There are certain situations where you would think, oh well, actually, of course, that's gonna make the stammer stronger, and then not at all. And then there's other times where they seem completely relaxed, and then it pops up out of nowhere, and you're like, oh, it's not connected necessarily to the things that you might think it is, and and that's certainly the case. For Lenny, sometimes it vanishes for quite long periods of time and we just think, oh well, that's it then. It's must have gone, and then a few months later it pops up again, and we were all a bit like, oh, it hasn't gone, it's still here. And so yeah, it's really interesting, and you can't. We like patterns and order, don't we? We like to know why things happen and when, and create a system of understanding, and that's not possible with a stammer. And I think that actually once you accept that and just go, well, it is part of me, and it will be part of me forever, whether it's there or not, then it's kind of then it kind of maybe sets you free a little bit, which is what Billy's going through in both books, I suppose, is that understanding of just self-acceptance.
I want to talk a little bit about child performers, because Billy really, he's proven that he has a certain amount of success and he's keen to grow that, but mum and dad sort of have the reins on him a little bit. I know you were an actress yourself. I think when you played Ruby, you were an adult actually, rather than a child performer. But is that something that you've encountered? And do you think his mum and dad are right to keep the reins on him, or should they let him go a little bit?
Oh, it's hard, isn't it, that one? I mean, I think they do seem quite strict for me. I would definitely, if my Lenny does not want to be a comedian, that was not based on truth. So luckily I don't have to deal with the idea of him asking me to go and perform in the local pub. But I think I would definitely be a little bit more open to that than Billy's parents are. But it really does come with complications, and I think that the amount of children now that say that they want to be famous, or they want to be, they want to be YouTubers, or they want to be seen by a lot of people. I think it's something that is so new, and often adults react quite strongly. And I know that even when I'm doing school visits, and kids often talk about those dreams and those desires, and it's hard not to just kind of feel frustrated with those, as if they're not, as if they're vacuous, or they don't have any, those dreams don't have as much depth or whatever. And I think I've had to really look at that response and go, no, actually, I'm just old, and I need to update my attitudes and go, what is it about this that is so appealing? and what can we do as adults to make it less to make it clearer what that means as something to go into as a kid, actually what fame means, and so it's a bit more transparent, and so that the highs and the lows and the positives and negatives are a bit more available to be looked at, and yeah, and maybe discussed a little bit more, rather than just saying, well, that's not, no, you know, being famous isn't enough, or being a YouTuber is a nonsense or whatever. Then I think, yeah, maybe a little bit more discussion.
It's interesting because there is an aspiration behind that, and I think we shouldn't necessarily knock, I'm with you, we shouldn't necessarily knock that back, but we are all learning a bit about how to cope with it, and we'll come to the sort of celebrity aspect of it when we talk about your villain, who, let me tell you, was booing him all the way through. But stick with Billy for a moment, and some of the issues that he raises. I know that with young magicians, like the Magic Circle actually has outlets for younger magicians. Is there anything for young comedians that is similar, like a young comedy club circuit, or not?
Yeah, well, I did a thing with comedy for kids, and they run workshops for budding young comedians. They also do comedy shows for kids, so kids can actually see stand up, because obviously so much stand up is just so inappropriate, that there's that on the circuit, which is doing really well. But in terms of performing, it's it's talent shows. It's talent shows, and I suppose village fairs and things like that, isn't it? That's the only place that I think young comedians would get a chance, because comedy clubs are generally really adult places.
Incredibly adult. They're too adult for many adults.
Yeah.
is the truth. My gosh, I've had many of a blush in a comedy club. But we do learn quite a bit about the mechanics of comedy from your writing. To most of us, it looks really spontaneous, but it seems there's quite a lot of work and preparation that goes into producing a set. So I'm learning all about comebacks. Tell us about comebacks.
Oh, thank goodness I've never had to use a comeback. So, yeah, so there's it, obviously all the breadth of comedians and their style is so huge and varied, that obviously the type of work that goes in to their comedy is very different. Some literally have a script and write it out, and they have comebacks that for very specific events that happen regularly in a crowd. So, if there's somebody drunk in the crowd, they've got a comeback very specific to that, about what they've been drinking, or whatever that may be. Or if somebody shouts out, they've got a very specific comeback. So they know it may look very improvised, but obviously that they will have said those comebacks numerous times, because it's got to actually, in a way, a comeback's got to be even more bulletproof and stronger than your material that you're using, because you're only using a comeback when something is kicking off in the audience, or when something is happening that might be a bit more unpredictable. And so they have to be really quite strong, and if your comeback isn't strong, then it can really spiral, and you can see some comedy nights go in a very bad direction if you don't take control of those moments. And it's all about, being in control. Even if you're a comedian who is less high status than someone else, you still actually in those moments have to be in control, whatever your character is. But yeah, there's an awful lot of, comedians, when they're doing their first sets, they've to work up their first 10 minutes, like, you're talking about like really, really specifically working on, okay, every 30 seconds of your material is so important, and so kind of like, and then you build it and build it and build it out and getting your first 10 minutes is massive. And then when you get your first 20 minutes, it's kind of huge that you've actually got a set of 20 minutes that you feel is solid. So yeah, it's a real It is a real skill.
It's amazing. And as I say, a lot of this is threaded through. So I'm learning quite a bit about how it all works, even though I might have intuitively picked some of that up just from seeing comedy. There was a little quote in there that I absolutely loved. It's, if people think you're talking about the real stuff, the jokes will surprise them. I love that idea.
Yeah, yeah. Well, again, it's different styles, isn't it? Because some people just do one-liners and don't expect you to believe anything that they're saying. They just are there for the jokes. But I think, yeah, for anecdotal comedy, which is, I guess, what Billy's more interested in. He's more interested in those telling those stories and actually finding something from truth and then making that funny. And I think that's where a lot of humor, for me, that's where humor comes from, isn't it? It comes from a place of truth, and it comes from all of those other feelings that may not be funny, and then you turn it into something funny, and it may be surprising if it comes from somewhere that's not necessarily that humorous, and then you do make it funny, then it's a nice surprise because it's
Again, a real contrast with the villain, who we are going to come to, I promise you, later, you know, the type of comedy. Can we just talk briefly about the jokes at the beginning of chapters, just for the teachers out there? What kind of underwear do maths teachers wear? Algebras, of course. Look, do you make the jokes up and do you write them for Christmas crackers?
No, I don't. I have an army of people who I am like, right, we need to find jokes. All of the kids I've literally ever taught, I'm like, right, go out and find me jokes, please, because I need more jokes. So basically, the idea is that they're meant to be Billy's favorite jokes. You know, when Billy starts with joke book jokes, we all start with joke book jokes. That's where everyone begins. And I thought actually having these jokes at the starts of chapters, some which people will know, some which people will never have heard before, kind of turn it into like that thing of it's like a joke book. So it works as a book. And then actually, for those kids who just want to flick through and look at the starts of chapters, they can use it as a joke book as well. But yeah, the idea, I'm so glad I didn't start trying to just use ones that I'd made up, because I would have set myself an absolutely impossible challenge there, wouldn't I, with 2 books for every chapter. So no, I'm glad I just used jokes. But I wanted them to connect somehow with the themes in the chapters, which was the tricky bit. So it was like, okay, right, I need a joke about bullies, or I need a joke about, you know, school or whatever. And so I would just I used to teach drama, and all of every register that I ever took, they had to tell me a joke. And so I'd literally just be writing down hundreds and hundreds of jokes over the months and gathered up just a large supply of jokes.
Well, under my desk, I have a big carrier book bag full of joke books, because I recently ran a workshop about using joke books, reading joke books. Using is not a very good word, really, but reading joke books in the classroom, and just the whole range of intellectual challenge that comes with reading
Yeah.
a joke. And in a way, with your former bully, Blakemore, we discover a little bit about the challenge that a joke can present. You don't always get it necessarily.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, when you see young children first telling jokes, and when they don't understand the wordplay or the timing or but they kind of first getting it. It's one of the most wonderful things in the world, isn't it? Hearing a
Mm.
small child tell a joke that isn't really a joke at all, but they give it the kind of beat and patter of that, to then
Mm.
starting to break it down and understand where, you know, maybe using a word in a different way or all of those different things. But it's a really complicated thing to
Yeah.
do and to understand.
Yeah, and it's why this book is really, you know, that it's year 7. It's that transition from primary to secondary, and that verbal humour that a lot of these jokes are tends to be, you know, in developmental terms, around 9 years upwards. Obviously, it's broader than that, but people that have looked at it developmentally say it's around 9 years upwards that that kind of linguistic humour starts to be understood. Honestly, one last question, because you've got a reading for us. I know everybody will want to listen to that, but one last question about comedy, and that is to do with timing. And so much of it is about timing. And I wondered whether, being a stand-up comedian yourself, whether that somehow transfers into how you write a comic novel.
So I definitely never call myself a stand-up comedian. I
Okay.
have done stand-up comedy, but honestly, it was it was such a terrifying part of my life that I like to have moved on from that. So I never would class myself as one. But yes, I have done it. So I guess there is some level of understanding. I I think that I guess that, well, I think that a lot comes in my writing. I think that the combination of having been an actress, so therefore seeing things from a character driven point of view, and when I'm writing in the first person, it does feel like I'm writing a monologue as a character. And I think that comes from my acting. And then obviously, comedy's been a massive part of my life, whether I like it or not. I have done it, and I probably will end up doing it again. And my husband's a comedian, so I'm surrounded by it quite a lot, and that obviously is going to impact how I view the world, and and just I guess how I see stories and um things. And so I guess it does impact the way I write, in as much as it it's quite stream of consciousness when I'm writing. And because there's always humor to be had in situations for me, there is always a laugh there somewhere. And so obviously when I'm writing, that it's natural that even when I'm writing about something really difficult, there's lots of really tough stuff in my books as well, but actually there's always round the corner, the tougher something is, the bigger the laugh potentially there is on the other side of it, because that's how life works, isn't it? I mean, that's how we work as human beings. It's all, there's flip sides to each emotion. And I guess that's what I really like, is both. I never would want to try and write a book that was purely that was seen as just kind of only humorous or just out and out comedy, because that wouldn't sit right with me, because that's not the truth for me. The truth is that life has both in it, and every moment and every day, and it has a bit of each in it. And so that's I guess what comes out when I'm writing.
Which leads us quite nicely into what you're going to read for us. And I will ask you to set that up. But as you've said, there's a lot of depth to these books, and they are very poignant. And sometimes humour can sharpen that poignancy, I think. So tell us a little bit about, because we haven't talked about any of the other characters yet.
Yeah, so we've got obviously there's Blakemore, who has a slightly different role in the second book. He was the bully in the first book, but he plays a little bit of a different role in the second book. I really enjoyed coming back to Blakemore, actually. And in the scene that I'm going to read for you today, we've got Skyler, who her story is definitely we go into her story a lot more in the second book, and I was really pleased to be able to do that, because in the first book I felt like there was so much going on with her that we didn't really get to look at, and so I went there in the second book with Skyler. And obviously, there's all the other characters are still there. Mr. Osho, for you teachers, Mr. Osho is still there, and all of his friends are still there, and his sister, and so yeah, they are all still there. It was so lovely coming back and having these characters already there and waiting to be written. But the scene that I'm going to read to you now is really early on in the story, and we're at school, and basically we're just Skylar's not been in. She's not been coming into school that often, and or being very late quite often, and she's just come in late, and Billy's a little bit worried about her. Our first lesson is history. We all walk into the class reluctantly. We have a new teacher, Mr. Johnson, and he's horrible. My friends, the regulars, started calling him Shouty Man, and now the whole of year 7 call him that too. I'm glad I've got Alex, Josh and Matthew round me. Whenever Shouty Man is telling someone off, we all make funny faces to make each other laugh. I hope he never catches us. Shouty Man sent Josh out for jiggling the other day, before we'd even sat down. Then, when he was allowed back in, he started jiggling again, which is just what Josh does. And Shouty Man sent him out again. It was totally unfair. He's given me 3 negatives for tapping too. 1 more and I'll get a detention. The reason I tap so much is because he terrifies me. The tapping calms me down. It doesn't help with my stammer though. My stammer is so bad in Mr. Johnson's lessons, even though I've got the regulars by my side. I'm glad we didn't have him when I first started at Bannerdale, when I had no friends and was still hiding under the stairwell. Back then, Mr. Johnson would probably have made me wet myself. Shouty Man is the only teacher who gives out negatives. Most of the others threaten them but never follow it through. We have to carry a little pink card around with us, and it has 4 spaces for negatives. When it gets full, you get an automatic detention. Caleb McCreven in Year 9 sells fake ones for £1, so you can always have an empty card and dodge detention. I'm too scared to talk to Caleb McCreven though. He has a scar on his face and once headbutted someone in a fight at the gates. Which means I have 3 negatives on my card and I can't get another one before the summer holidays. Mum and Dad would not be pleased if I got a detention. They might even say I can't do my stand-up gig, which would be a total disaster. I've seen Shouty Man prowling the halls at lunchtime, giving out negatives for wonky ties and mismatched socks. I'm really trying not to tap in history now. I sit on my hands, although he might give me a negative for that too. A detention for tapping or hand-sitting both seem a bit over the top to me, but clearly not to Shouty Man. He barks instead of speaking. In my class, you will not fiddle, wriggle, whisper, stare out of the window, pick your nose, swing your feet, or crack your knuckles. Do you understand? Do not pick up your pen or anything else for that matter until I specifically ask you to do so. Even when Shouty Man is talking about history, he barks. It's pretty impressive how he can make the Norman conquest sound like a direct threat. It's as though he's literally going to send us all into battle if we so much as think about touching our pencil cases. Blakemore thinks he's ex-military. I can always spot him, he says. My dad used to be in the army. He's the same. Loves rules. And shouting. Today, as I'm struggling not to pick off the splashes of paint from my fingers, Mr. Johnson is shouting at us about Anne Boleyn. She had a bad enough time of it, what with being beheaded. I'm sure she would not want the details of her life being spat out angrily at a bunch of mildly terrified 12-year-olds. She was beheaded on the 19th of May, 1536, at the Tower of London. Skylar Norkins, are you listening to me? Do not ever close your eyes in my class. Everyone looks at Skylar, who's gone really pale. Then, before Mr. Johnson can shout or give out 1,000 negatives, she collapses. Her body slumps into her chair and her head lolls forward, banging hard on the desk. It looks like she's been shot. Yasmin is sitting next to her and screams, but manages to grab her before she slides down to the floor. I get up to help, but Mr. Johnson shouts, "Down!" and I immediately sit back in my chair like a scared puppy in a training class. We all stare. This feels different to the usual classroom dramas. Different to when Rhea Fletcher vomited in the science lab and stank out the whole room. The corner of the Bunsen burner still smells like sick. Different to when Elijah Campbell's chair broke and he fell headfirst onto the floor. Different to when Elliot Barker tied Eric Webber's shoelaces together in food tech and he tripped and fell into a lasagna. Everyone is really freaked out. So, that was slightly longer than I thought it was going to be. Sorry about that. I hope that no, I didn't send anybody off to sleep with that one. But yeah, that was the start really of kind of the unraveling of Skyler's journey in this story.
It's a little while before we learn what is the problem. There are hints early on, but we don't know exactly what's going on in Skyler's life until about halfway through the book. Things start to emerge. But one of the things that comes across here in your writing is how interconnected the emotions are. I mean, you've talked about comedy alongside other emotions, but grief, anger, hatred, all of those things. And it's very easy to make assumptions on the basis of the behaviour that somebody is displaying rather than the cause of it.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And it's, I guess it's really, it's big stuff. And for at that age, for to when you start dealing with actually going on what's going on in your life and how that connects to you as a person and how you're feeling physically and how everything, and the fact that it is all connected. And this is really, really big stuff for Billy and for Skyler to start understanding and getting their heads around how to deal with these huge emotions and big things that kind of feel impossible to deal with.
Mm. I'm going to open the Q&A. So if anybody does have a question for you, I'm just going to open that there. So anybody that wants to put a question in the Q&A, please do. But in the meantime, I'll ask you a few more questions while we're waiting for those to come. Sticking with Skyler for a moment, she is quite keen to keep hidden. I mean, it's quite hard for people to help in a way because she doesn't want people to know what her problems are. And that's fairly typical too, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And because she's, she's quite loud and seems quite confident, and she brushes things off, and and she's very good. She's learned the skills of kind of deflecting and making sure that even when those questions are asked, that they, that that they don't go any further, I guess. And you do become quite skilled at that when you want to hide something. It you learn tricks to do it, and she's definitely done that. And so yeah, I think that's quite a common thing. And certainly, with kids, in a classroom full of kids, there'll be so much going on, won't there, in so many of them, that it might be very hard to get a glimpse of, really, or to understand, because they'll have found techniques of hiding it.
Mm. I'm going to come to Jen's question in just one moment, but I want to say that I sort of fell in love with Blake more a bit in this book as well. Yeah, and him microwaving a chili, it just seemed like a really inventive thing to do, and it just goes wrong. Who wouldn't want to try these things out?
That was actually, I microwaved a chili at school, and that was based on me. I got in so much trouble for that, really bad. And it did create a toxic gas that everyone had to be evacuated. But that was me. I'm so glad you chose that bit, because I loved the fact. And the person that I did it with, I've not been in contact with since I was at secondary school, but I kind of I had this hope when I wrote that bit, that he would have a child of this age and would read it and go, "Oh, that was me. We did that together."
So I want to ask you, Helen, did you do it to be naughty, or did you do it because you were curious?
Yeah, it felt like, well, that's the injustice of it felt like an experiment. It felt like we just wanted to know what would happen, and if it would explode. And the injustice of it, and the thing that really, really got us cross, was that thing that the teachers on our detention slips and on everything said that we'd stolen. And it was the fact that they'd called us thieves, and we were like, we weren't thieves. We didn't take it anywhere. We just changed its, it's kind of, we turned it into a gas. We just,
Yeah.
so yeah, we were really, really cross that they'd actually taken us down for stealing something, which is, yeah.
Which is exactly what happens in this episode here. And I love Billy's observation because he's beginning to understand Blakemore as well. And he says he can't help getting in trouble. He can't do right for wrong, really, can he? That's the sadness of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I kind of fell in love with Blakemore a little bit as I was writing it, because you just kind of, you do get that sense that he's doing the best that he can all
Mm.
the time, but he's limited by so many things that, yeah, that things go wrong for him, and you know, and he hasn't always got the speech and the words to be able to express things that do make life so much easier when you can, you know, when you can articulate yourself and
Mm.
communicate. It does make it so much easier. So you know, there's a couple of times where Blakemore does say, he actually does vocalize things, and I was like, yeah, come on, Blakemore. It felt like a celebration when he actually, yeah, could really voice his feelings.
Let's have a look at some of these audience questions that are coming in. So here's the first one. I probably don't need to read it because you can read it for yourself there.
Hi, Mikey. Do I have another book planned? Well, I do. I am currently writing another book. It's not another Billy book, but it is another book. I've got another book coming out in July, which is a different kind of book because it's with a different publisher. So it's slightly shorter, and it's called The Piano at the Station. And that was
Mm.
inspired by the pianos at train stations. So that one's out in July. So have a look, keep your eyes peeled for that one, Mikey. And then the one that I'm writing at the moment um, is about it's about a boy who realizes that he wants to become a hypnotist. He wants to hypnotize people. He wants to learn how to control people's minds and suggest things to people and make them happen. And so that's what I'm writing at the moment.
Mm. So the book for teachers, just so they know, The Piano at the Station is published by Barrington Stoke. So it's going to be a shorter read and a lovely accessible read as well. So fantastic. Here's another question. This one's from Jane. I think she's your biggest fan. She loves Billy Plimpton. So, oh, good. I'm
Um,
glad she's asking about this character.
Well, Jane, I'm really, really sorry. I'm not going to be able to answer this one with any degree of honesty, I'm afraid, because I could be done for all sorts of things. Because yes, I did have people in mind. I
Mm.
had I had I had a couple of people. There were basically two well, there was a comedian and another personality that I had in mind when I wrote the character of Leo Leggett. Um, firmly at the front of my mind, but the inspiration for it, which is slightly different to writing the character, the inspiration came when I slightly had a bit of a struggle when I was coming up for, when they said write a sequel. At first I was like, oh, brilliant, you know, oh, that'll be easy because I've got my starting points, I'll be able to do that. And then actually I got a little bit kind of, sequel's hard because people have expectations, and what if I don't do what people want with Billy? And lots of people are always like, you know, well, the sequel's never as good as the first, and all of that. So I got a bit stuck and a bit trapped in those thoughts. And the thing that actually got me out of them and allowed me to just start was, I was thinking about what sequels I like more than the first. I was like, if I can come up with a sequel that I think's better than the first one, that's going to help me just get over this and just go for it and do it. And the thing that kept coming up in my head was Paddington 2. And I loved Paddington 2 so much more than Paddington 1. And when I thought about the reasons why, the baddie in Paddington 2 really, really stood out for me. And that's when I thought, oh, maybe I should write a baddie. Maybe I should come up with a really good baddie character. And that's when it kind of, I got it and went, I'm going to come up with a baddie. And the baddie is going to be an adult in Billy's life. And that's when it all started kind of making me go, I want to write this. I really want to write that character. And so it was inspired by that, but based on some comedians that I can't name, I'm afraid.
Jane, you're going to have to fill in the gaps for yourself on that one. I was certainly filling in a few gaps myself. But for anybody listening who hasn't already read the book, as Jane clearly has, I think maybe you need to just give us a bit of information about who Leo Leggett is.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah. So Leo Leggett is Billy's hero. Actually, he's a world famous. He's the biggest comedian, in the country, in the world. He's huge, on the telly all the time, and he's really, really well loved. And Billy meets him, and actually through Leo posting Billy online, Billy goes viral, and so it all feels like a dream come true at first, but then we find out that Leo Leggett is not all that he seems to be.
Mm. So there's a little bit in this story. I mean, the curtains have got to be lifted, or the gauze or whatever has got to be lifted from Billy's eyes in this story, basically. He's got to see his idol for what he is. But Leo Leggett is fronting the government's there's so much irony here. He's fronting the government's big new anti-bullying campaign. They wanted a real man of the people to get their message across. And the Prime Minister put in a personal call to him. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Yeah. It does feel like when you're writing these things and you're making it up, and it is a little bit like, oh, I'm sure that there's probably lots and lots of people that you could connect these things to, can't you? There's enough corruption and there's enough horrible people in powerful places to be able to actually link it to all sorts of people.
Absolutely. But there's another interesting point about comedy there, because we've talked about the virtues of comedy quite a bit already, but actually it can be used very negatively, and it can be a tool for bullying as well. And some comedy acts really thrive on that bullying side of things, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really, it's quite scary and very powerful, isn't it? When somebody, if somebody uses humor against you, or in an attacking way against a group of people or anything, and there is that sense of, well, it's just a joke. It feels quite dark, doesn't it? When it's like, you can't use that. You can't say that because something's a joke, you are allowed to express hate or really, really awful views because you're making people laugh, that makes it okay. I mean, it's been a theme in comedy for years, forever, I guess. And it is, I guess, with being cancelled now and silenced and all of this, it often comes up. Well, what should we be allowed to say, and what are we not allowed to say, and what's okay to do on stage and what's not okay to do. But yeah, that's definitely throughout the book is actually, we need to be careful about using humor and comedy to bully people.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing that comes up in relation to Leo Leggett as well is that kind of cheap humor, toilet humor that doesn't have any depth to it. We'll just put a few words in here, and that will make everybody laugh. But it doesn't really take you anywhere, does it?
Yeah, and I mean, I think sometimes. I mean, sometimes, like, I like humor that literally is just silly and makes me laugh, and is kind of, just somebody being very silly and whatever, whatever. There is, I guess, there is value in making people laugh, but when there is when there is something underneath it that is cruel, that's when, like, just silliness, just somebody falling over and farting is kind of, there's nothing cruel about that. It's silly, and yes, there's no depth to it. But if it makes you laugh, that's fine.
Mm.
But if there is a cruelty underneath it, then it's then it's a different thing.
Mm. I'm just going to remind people that the Q&A is open. So please do feel that you've just got a few more minutes left to get some questions in if you've got a burning question for Helen. If not, I can keep going all night, but I'm sure she'd rather be answering your questions. Anyway, I wanted to take us onto a slightly different, while we're just waiting to see if we have any more, onto a slightly different tack. One of the characters that I absolutely loved in your first book was Granny Bread. Now, Granny Bread is no longer with us, but it seems to me that she's been replaced a little bit, that role by Mrs. Gibbons, who lives at the Oaks. And that's one thing that really comes across in your writing as well. The joy to be had in intergenerational relationships. Billy at one point muses, do we change that much when we get older? Or is it only on the outside? Billy, I can tell you, it's only the outside. I promise you. Inside, you're still whatever age. I'm sort of stuck at 16, I think. Tell us a bit about, because there's such warmth in your writing around this.
Yeah. Well, I guess we just in lockdown we built a kind of fancy shed. Me and my husband decided to build a shed, and my mum moved into it, and she's actually called Granny Bean. So that it's quite clear where maybe I got Granny Bread from. And so there's been a lot of. She moved in nearly a year ago, and she's 83, and the kids are now going in between our house and her little cabin in the garden and spending a lot of time, and it's just so special and so feels so important for both, for her and for them. And so I guess it is a topic that is really near to me, and I'm witnessing it and seeing how special that is and how important it is for everybody. And it was really nice because Mrs. Gibbons in the first book, obviously she was only in it a little bit, but he was quite scared of her. He found her her slightly odd makeup and hats and things quite alarming, and so it's quite nice actually to then look at that and go, oh, actually no, he's got through that, he's got beyond that, and she is a link to Granny Bread. There is still that connection there that is quite nice. Once he'd got over even going to the Oaks, he didn't want to even be there, he couldn't actually be there at first. And so but yeah, I think it's a really special bond, and so it's nice to write. So it feels really lovely to write about something that is so special.
So now everybody knows that Helen Rutter keeps her elder relatives in a shed, presumably not along with the garden forks and the plant pots. I'm assuming the shed's a bit better.
Yeah, it is a fancy shed, honestly. Although the hot water is broken at the moment, so she's not got any water. But it's a very fancy shed. It's lovely, actually, and it's the only bit because we can't afford to put our heating on. But hers is really lovely and warm, so we all end up going down there and being in a warm shed rather than in our cold house.
That sounds lovely. Coming back, we've got another question for Mikey, so that will probably be the last question of the evening. But before we get there, I just wanted to say that another thing that I loved was the kind of therapeutic value of animals that comes through too. I've never had a pet, but I've recently witnessed the difference that it has made to somebody in my family having a pet and really calming their life down. So are you a pet owner, and is this the inspiration for the dog in this story?
Yeah, so usually that chair behind me normally has a whippet in it, and the whippet is called Billy Whiz. I didn't even know that I'd named my main character after my whippet, but he sits there I'm amazed he's not there now, actually. He's always there. And I think he was basically just sending me vibes saying, name the character after me. And so, yes, he's a massive part of my life, constantly following me around in that kind of Whippety way, where Whippets always look really terribly sad and mournful. And he's literally like my shadow following me around all the time, like a strange, furry, sad stalker. Yes, he's very much present in my life, and a huge member of the family. And we had another dog up until about a year ago. We had another big rescue dog who was absolutely completely challenging and marvelous and ridiculous all in the same thing, and he was with us for 15 years. So yeah, I'm a big, and we've got, we've had chickens, and there's a guinea pig, and there's doves, and we've had all sorts. So yeah, we're a very pet household. So yeah, animals are big in the
Fabulous.
Rutter house.
We're going to go to Mikey's question, then hang on everyone, because it's then competition time and a chance for you to win a group set, perfect for a book club in school, a group set of the book. So let's just see this last question. Here we are.
So Mikey, how long does it take to write my books? It's changed a lot. So the first book, The Boy Who Made Everyone Laugh, from the moment that I had the idea for the story and wrote that first chapter and read it to Lenny, to the time it got on the shelf in the shop, was about 2.5 years. And when I say that to classes, they all go, oh, like it's so long. But actually, that's not actually that long. Some authors take a lot longer than that to get their first book written and published. But that was not I wasn't writing constantly, Mikey, for 2.5 years. Like, it wasn't just me sitting in this shed for a whole 2.5 years. There were gaps. There are gaps when you send it off, and they are reading it and want to edit it, and you get the cover. And I had to find an agent, had to find a publisher in that time as well. So it did take longer. And then my second book, The Boy Whose Wishes Came True, that took about a year. So that's a bit shorter. And then again, The Funniest Boy in the World, again, was about a year. But obviously I wrote the other book that's coming out in July as well during that time. So I'm getting faster. I'm getting better, Mikey. This is what happens when you do something, you tend to get better at it. So hopefully I'll get faster and faster.
Okay, so fabulous. Thank you for those questions, everybody. And now there is a chance to win that group set of books. I'm going to keep the question really easy. Don't believe in difficult questions. So here you are. In order to win this set of books, or for a chance to win this set of books, all I need to know is the name of Billy's female friend who featured in the reading that Helen read at the beginning of the session. And here's how you enter. So instructions coming up on the screen. Okay, so you've got a few days to enter. Not that you need them, because you heard Helen read earlier, but you just have to send your answer to us at assistant@justimagine.co.uk. Now, I want to thank you all for coming along this evening, and I really want to thank Helen for taking us into her book and her writing life. We're going to treat you to a second reading. Helen's going to read us out of the session this evening. So Helen, I'm going to hand over to you to set up this episode, and we're just going to relax. It's like having a story at bedtime. What could be more wonderful?
Exactly, get snuggled up. So this section is when Billy has booked himself his very first proper stand-up gig in a local pub. And this is what happens. Dad walks us down to the pub and stands at the bar with a pint. Next to him sits an old man who's quietly talking to himself. When we introduce ourselves to the barman, he calls over the bar and a lady with a shiny blondish mullet and a ring on every finger shows us the stage upstairs. The room smells musty and the floor is sticky. We go out onto the little stage, looking for a surface to project the animations onto, but there isn't one. The mullet lady mutters, "It's like a sodding school play." I'm not sure if she wants us to hear or not, and so I pretend I haven't. I start to feel the nerves flood through my body. My brain feels busy and my skin tingles, but I ignore it. I look out towards where the audience will be sitting and try to imagine the smiling faces and the laughter. It feels very different to the talent show and TV interview. The chairs are still stacked up and there are empty crisp packets on the floor, and I won't be able to use Skyler's amazing cartoons. It's okay. I will do it without them, I say, trying to smile. We can save them for the next gig. We head back down to the bar where the football is playing loudly on a load of huge screens around the pub. The room is busier now, but no one looks like they're here for a comedy night. None of the faces staring up at the football even look like they could smile, let alone laugh. Big men with bald heads and thick necks. I imagine their angry faces staring back at me as I get stuck on a punchline. I'm starting to panic inside. Maybe this was a terrible idea. I have to practice in front of real people, though, don't I? It's the reality of being a stand-up comedian. On the comedy forum, I read it says the comedy circuit is made up of hundreds of pubs and little comedy clubs and rooms all over the country, and it's the circuit that allows comedians to earn a living. I have to do this if I want to be a proper comedian and not just some kid who did a talent show once. Dad buys us a Coke each, and when it's 15 minutes to showtime, we all go upstairs. The lady with the rings is huffing as she puts the chairs out, and so we go to help. Is there anywhere I can wait backstage? I ask. I don't want to be standing around when the audience arrive. Backstage, la-di-da, where do you think you are? She laughs to herself and I go red. Then she says, "You can wait in the back, in the bog. Hide in the cubicle and come out when you hear your name." I look at Skyler, Dad and Blakemore, who all look as terrified as I feel. "You don't have to do this, Billy," Dad says gently. "Yeah. I do." They go and sit down at the back of the empty room. On my way to the toilet, I see Alex and Matthew arrive and look around the room. I asked them to sit at the back so I wouldn't get distracted. I want it to feel like it will when I'm on the comedy circuit for real, when I don't have people I know there. I go into the toilet. As I sit on the grotty toilet lid, I can feel my heart starting to race. That's where I will leave it. So